Friends, if you are in the mood for an action-packed thriller filled with suspense, intense shootouts, and a story that keeps you hooked from beginning to end, then Fire with Fire, 2012, is definitely a movie you should watch in English. And friends, if you are visiting our channel for the very first time, make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more thrilling movie breakdowns, detailed reviews, and fascinating film facts. In today's video, the film we are going to explore is Fire with Fire, a high-stakes story that's all about courage, revenge, and survival. We will talk about what makes this film stand out, what it's really about, and where you can watch it easily. I will also tell you on which OTT platforms or which satellite channels this movie is available, so you don't have to waste your time searching. We'll cover all the essential information you need. But that's not all. Friends, we will also take a detailed look into the technical department of the movie, who directed it, who worked behind the scenes, how the music contributes to the thrilling vibe of the story, and how the pre-production, filming, and post-production stages came together to create this action-packed experience. We will talk about the budget of the film, whether it was a small project or a big one, and how much this film earned at the box office. Was it a hit or a miss? You'll find out. We will go through the complete storyline of Fire with Fire, what happens, how the tension builds, and what makes the story so gripping. I'll also give you a short and honest review of the story to help you decide whether this film should be on your watch list or not. Along with that, we will have a closer look at the star cast, who played which role, how each actor performed, and how their characters contribute to the story. I'll tell you about the lead performances, the villains, the supporting cast, and how all these elements come together to bring the film to life. Not only that, but we will also uncover some interesting facts and lesser-known details about the making of the film that you might not have heard before. So friends, I would highly recommend you watch this video till the very end because there's a lot to discover, and you wouldn't want to miss any of it. So let's dive into the world of Fire with Fire, and begin this exciting journey together. Let's get started. Fire with Fire opens by dropping us straight into the heart of Jeremy Coleman's everyday life. He's a firefighter, a man who runs into burning buildings, saves lives, and works closely with his trusted team. His life seems simple, focused, and purpose-driven, but it doesn't take long for everything to shatter. One night, while stopping at a convenience store, Jeremy witnesses a horrifying scene. A brutal murder carried out by David Hagan, a dangerous white supremacist gang leader who controls crime in the city with an iron fist. Hagan is the kind of villain who doesn't need to shout to be terrifying. His cold, methodical violence makes it clear that Jeremy has just seen something he should not have seen. This single moment becomes the spark that ignites the entire story. Jeremy is suddenly swept into a world of crime, danger, and fear he never chose to enter. The police quickly pull him into the legal system, where they beg him to testify against Hagan. Jeremy, knowing the danger, agrees. But this decision comes with a heavy price. Almost immediately, Jeremy is placed into witness protection, where he's given a new identity and forced to leave behind his job, his friends, and his life. The film doesn't waste time. It quickly escalates the danger as Hagan's criminal network starts tracking Jeremy, proving that no amount of protection can fully keep him safe. The system designed to hide him begins to crumble under the pressure of Hagan's power. The story moves forward with an urgent linear pace, but what makes it thrilling is how the tension keeps building at every turn. One of the film's most powerful narrative shifts happens when Jeremy realizes he's not just in danger. Everyone he loves is a target. This is the moment where his mindset changes. He goes from being a man on the run to a man ready to fight back. And this decision flips the story on its head. Instead of relying on the police or the witness protection program, Jeremy takes control of his fate. He makes the life-altering choice to face Hagan head-on, even if it means becoming something he never thought he could be. Jeremy's transformation is not rushed. The movie carefully shows how each step pushes him further from his old life, and deeper into a world where violence is sometimes the only answer. He's not trained to kill. He's not a fighter in the traditional sense. But desperation drives him to learn quickly. His journey from a civilian to someone who can challenge organized crime is both thrilling and emotionally complex. The film doesn't just throw action at the screen. It shows the toll this takes on Jeremy's soul, his sense of morality, and his inner conflict about who he's becoming. A key emotional driver in the story is his connection with Mike Sella, a hard-edged U.S. Marshal who's been fighting his own battle with Hagan for years. Mike isn't just doing his job, he has his own history, his own reasons for wanting to bring Hagan down. And that personal edge makes his partnership with Jeremy more than just a protection detail. It's two men chasing justice, but in very different ways. Mike is trying to do things by the book, but he knows Jeremy's breaking those rules, and deep down, part of him respects it. This dynamic adds grit and emotional weight to the narrative. As Jeremy moves deeper into the world of revenge, the story unleashes a steady stream of conflicts. There are brutal shootouts, surprise betrayals, and intense life-or-death confrontations. Jeremy isn't just up against Hagan's men. He's also battling the moral question of how far he's willing to go. He's pulled into a series of choices where survival and justice don't always align. Can he still call himself the man he was when the story began? This tension is woven throughout the narrative, giving every action scene more meaning, because Jeremy isn't a cold-blooded action hero. He's a man who has been pushed to the edge and is desperately trying to find his way back. The movie doesn't play with timelines, flashbacks, or nonlinear tricks. It tells the story in a fast-moving, straight path, but what makes it engaging is the pacing and the way the stakes keep rising with every decision Jeremy makes. Each turning point feels heavier than the last. There's a natural rhythm to how the story balances action, emotional development, and character-driven tension. From violent ambushes to close-call escapes, every scene feels like it pushes Jeremy further into the fire. Physically, emotionally, and morally. The narrative also cleverly explores the idea of whether fighting fire with fire actually solves anything, or if it just burns you down in the process. Jeremy's path of revenge is thrilling to watch, but it constantly challenges the viewer to think about whether he's becoming the very thing he's trying to destroy. This internal struggle gives the story surprising emotional depth beneath all the guns, gang wars, and high-speed chases. Fire with Fire is a story that charges forward without taking unnecessary detours, but within that straightforward structure, it packs in layers of emotion, danger, and personal transformation. Jeremy's journey from an everyday firefighter to a man willing to take on an entire criminal empire by himself is gripping, dangerous, and at times heartbreaking. The story hooks you with its action but keeps you invested with its emotional stakes. It's a high-pressure ride that never slows down and always keeps you wondering how much more Jeremy is willing to risk to protect the people he loves, and whether there's anything left of the man he used to be by the time the fire is out. The character development in Fire with Fire, 2012, is the real engine that drives the film. It's not just about fast-paced action or sharp shootouts. It's about watching ordinary people evolve under extraordinary pressure. And that's where the story gets its real strength. The characters aren't static. They grow, they break, they rebuild, and they make decisions that forever change who they are. Each character is carefully placed to challenge, shape, or mirror the others, and their journeys are what make the story so engaging. At the heart of it all is Jeremy Coleman, a firefighter whose life is built on courage, loyalty, and selflessness. In the beginning, Jeremy is exactly what you'd expect from a firefighter. He risks his life to save others, he's steady under pressure, and he believes in a system where good people do good things and justice eventually wins. But this belief system is shattered when he witnesses a brutal murder. That moment is not just a plot device. It's the spark that ignites Jeremy's complete transformation. He is suddenly thrown into a world where the laws he trusted can't protect him, where the people chasing him don't fear prison, and where being a good man simply isn't enough to survive. His character begins as someone who runs toward danger and fires, but is completely unprepared to face the kind of cold, calculated violence that David Hagan represents. Jeremy's emotional journey is slow, painful, and believable. He doesn't instantly become a fighter. His first instinct is to follow the law, to hide, to let the police handle it. He's terrified, confused, and constantly looking for a way to escape this nightmare. But what the story does beautifully is show how each new threat, each failure of the system, each close brush with death chips away at that fear and replaces it with something harder. Determination, rage, and ultimately, a willingness to cross lines he never thought he would. Jeremy doesn't just want to stay alive anymore. He wants to take control, to protect the people he loves, to stop Hagan no matter what it costs. His character doesn't flip like a switch. He changes piece by piece, pushed by desperation, pulled by love, and hardened by betrayal. Watching him go from a man who saves lives to a man willing to take lives is the core of what makes his character so fascinating. His relationship with Mike Sella adds even more weight to this transformation. Mike isn't just a side character. He's a man who's been fighting his own private war with Hagan for years. Mike lost someone to Hagan's violence, and that wound has never really healed. What's brilliant about Mike's character is that he represents what Jeremy might become if he continues down this road. Mike plays by the book on the surface, but underneath, he's a man who knows that the system doesn't always deliver justice. When Mike sees Jeremy stepping outside the rules to fight back, there's a part of him that admires it, and maybe even envies it. Their connection isn't just a cop protecting a witness. It's two broken men caught in the same fire, each one forcing the other to face the things they're running from. Mike knows where this road leads, and he tries to pull Jeremy back, but there's a part of him that can't help but respect Jeremy's choice to fight. David Hagan stands in stark contrast to Jeremy. Hagan is not the kind of villain who changes. He is cold, controlled, and entirely comfortable using violence to maintain his power. He's not wild or reckless. He's a strategist who understands fear and control better than anyone else. His character is a wall that Jeremy has to climb. Hagan never doubts himself, never shows weakness, and that's what makes him so dangerous. He doesn't need to grow. His job is to force Jeremy and Mike to grow, to push them so hard that they either collapse or transform. Hagan is a symbol of unstoppable corruption and evil, and everything Jeremy becomes is in direct response to Hagan's power. Talia Durham is more than just the love interest. She's the emotional center of Jeremy's fight. Without her, Jeremy might have disappeared into hiding and never come back to face his enemies. Talia is the reason he chooses to fight. Her character isn't just there to be protected. She represents Jeremy's connection to his old life, his humanity, his softer side. Protecting her becomes Jeremy's personal mission, and his fear of losing her drives him to take the kind of risks he would have never considered at the beginning of the film. Talia's quiet strength gives Jeremy something to hold on to while his world falls apart. She's not a damsel in distress. She's the anchor that keeps him grounded, and that emotional connection adds weight to every dangerous step Jeremy takes. The supporting characters all play carefully crafted roles that shape Jeremy's journey. The U.S. Marshals symbolize the system that's supposed to work but repeatedly fails him. They mean well, but they're outmatched, and their limitations force Jeremy to step beyond them. Hagan's gang members are more than just nameless enemies. They are constant reminders that Hagan's influence reaches everywhere, that Jeremy will never be safe unless he fights back directly. Even the people Jeremy meets along the way, including those who help him or betray him, are stepping stones in his transformation from victim to warrior. What makes the character development so satisfying is that Jeremy's growth is messy and painful. He doesn't become a hero in the traditional sense. He becomes a man who is willing to burn everything down to protect what he loves. The film constantly challenges him with moral questions. How far will he go? Can he come back from this? Will the man who survives at the end still be the same man who ran into fires to save people? These unanswered questions give the story depth. The emotional complexity of Jeremy's transformation makes the action scenes more intense, because they aren't just about survival. They're about what those battles are doing to him as a person. Fire with Fire thrives on these character arcs. It's not about superheroes or untouchable action stars. It's about ordinary people facing extraordinary danger and making choices that change them forever. Jeremy's journey is gripping because it feels earned, step by step, from fear to fury, from victim to fighter. Mike's role is powerful because he is a living reminder of what happens when you live with revenge for too long. Hagan is terrifying because he is the kind of evil that doesn't flinch. And Talia gives the story its emotional soul, reminding Jeremy, and the audience, what's worth fighting for in the first place. Together, these characters create a story that's not just about bullets and explosions. It's about people caught in a fire that changes everything. The performances in Fire with Fire, 2012, are what truly inject life into this tense, emotional, and dangerous story. Without the right actors breathing depth into their characters, this film could have easily slipped into the pile of average action thrillers. But the cast shows up with intensity, subtlety, and an impressive commitment to making every scene feel like it matters. They don't just play their parts. They carry the weight of the story on their faces, in their voices, and through their silences. Josh Duhamel's performance as Jeremy Coleman is the spine of the entire movie. Duhamel doesn't walk into the story as some larger-than-life action star. He arrives as a regular man. A firefighter who's trained to save people from burning buildings, not trained to go toe-to-toe with murderers and gangsters. What's fascinating is how Duhamel balances Jeremy's evolution without ever losing the core of who he is. At the start, Jeremy is cautious, overwhelmed, and desperately clinging to the idea that the system will protect him. You can see it in his eyes. He's scared, unsure, not ready for what's about to come. Duhamel plays these early moments with a kind of raw honesty that makes Jeremy easy to root for. As the danger escalates, Jeremy starts to harden, and Duhamel carefully shifts his performance in a way that's never overplayed. His body language becomes more confident, his voice steadier, his decisions more aggressive. But Duhamel never lets the audience forget that deep down, Jeremy is still a man forced into violence, not a man who was born for it. This constant tug-of-war between fear and determination makes his journey believable. He doesn't suddenly become invincible. He's simply a man who's reached his breaking point and chooses to fight. Duhamel carries that weight beautifully, and that's what makes his performance stand out. Bruce Willis as Mike Sella brings exactly the kind of gravitas you'd expect from someone who's spent years watching justice slip through his fingers. But what's refreshing is that Willis doesn't rely on his typical action hero swagger here. He plays Mike with restraint, with tired eyes and quiet frustration. Mike is a man who's seen too much, who's lost too much, and who's starting to realize that playing by the book doesn't always get results. Willis doesn't need big speeches or explosive action scenes to leave an impact. He does it with small, deliberate choices. The way he listens, the way his voice softens when he talks to Jeremy, the way his silence says more than words ever could. Those are the moments that give his character depth. Mike is haunted, but he's still trying to do the right thing, and Willis lets that internal conflict show through every step. What makes his performance so effective is that he feels real. A man stuck between his badge and his need for personal closure. Mike isn't there to take over the action. He's there to guide, to warn, and to represent the cost of revenge. And Willis plays that with subtle, world-weary precision. Vincent D'Onofrio as David Hagan is absolutely electric. His performance is so unnervingly calm that he doesn't need to shout or wave guns around to feel dangerous. D'Onofrio brings this low, quiet menace to Hagan that makes him unpredictable and terrifying. He moves slowly, he speaks with a kind of casual cruelty, and he commands every room he's in without raising his voice. There's something bone-chilling about the way he threatens people. Not because he's loud, but because you can tell he fully believes that no one can touch him. D'Onofrio creates a villain who feels untouchable, not because of physical power, but because of the psychological grip he has on everyone around him. His character is like a shadow that stretches over the entire film. You always feel his presence, even when he's not on screen. D'Onofrio's ability to inject layers into Hagan makes him more than just a one-note villain. You can see that this man didn't stumble into power. He built it carefully, patiently, and mercilessly. His quiet control, his eerie stillness, and his total lack of fear make his performance unforgettable. Rosario Dawson as Talia Durham brings a beautifully grounded energy to the film. Talia isn't some flat character waiting on the sidelines for the hero to save her. Dawson plays her with complexity, making her both tough and emotionally vulnerable. She doesn't shrink when danger approaches, she stands her ground, but she's not fearless either, and that's what makes her performance feel honest. Talia feels like a fully fleshed-out person who's been pulled into this violent world against her will. And Dawson makes the audience feel her fear, her love, and her resilience. Her chemistry with Duhamel is a crucial part of the story's emotional core. Their connection never feels forced or rushed. Dawson brings warmth and quiet strength to Talia, making it completely believable that she would be Jeremy's reason to fight. When Talia is scared, you feel it. When she stands up to protect herself or Jeremy, you believe it. Dawson gives Talia a pulse, a personality, and a presence that lifts every scene she's in. The supporting cast also pulls their weight impressively. The U.S. Marshals, played by actors like Curtis 50 Cent Jackson and Richard Schiff, aren't there just to fill the background. They each bring distinct energy to their roles. 50 Cent plays a marshal who's focused, direct, and constantly frustrated by how little power the system gives him in this kind of situation. His sharp, no-nonsense delivery adds urgency to the film. Richard Schiff brings in the bureaucratic weight of the law, showing the limits of what the system can do when up against someone as dangerous as Hagan. Even the smaller gang members and henchmen feel alive and dangerous. They don't play as disposable bad guys, but as real threats with purpose and loyalty to Hagan's empire. What makes the performances across the board so effective is that everyone plays their part with total commitment to the story's emotional tone. No one seems like they're just walking through a paycheck roll. Each actor makes you feel the stakes, the tension, and the fear that ripple through every scene. The film's best moments aren't just in the action sequences. They're in the glances between characters, the quiet decisions, the cracks in their composure when they're pushed too far. Whether it's Duhamel's transformation, Willis's quiet weight, D'Onofrio's chilling calm, or Dawson's heartfelt strength, the performances work together like a perfect storm. They elevate the film, they make the action mean something, and they remind the audience that this isn't just a story about guns and revenge. It's about people, their choices, their fears, and what they're willing to do for the ones they love. These performances keep the film grounded, intense, and emotionally gripping from start to finish. The direction of Firefighter, 2012, under David Barrett's leadership is what steers the film through the dangerous territory where crime thrillers often risk becoming formulaic. Barrett doesn't just direct scenes. He shapes an emotional journey where tension, vulnerability, and personal stakes collide in a way that keeps the audience invested beyond the gunfire. His direction is like the silent hand that carefully controls how the story breathes, when it tightens, when it explodes, and when it deliberately slows down to let the emotional weight fully settle. What makes Barrett's approach interesting is his ability to keep the focus on the human cost of violence. He's not chasing the big-budget gloss or trying to turn this into a high-octane, superhero-level action showcase. Instead, he roots the film in something that feels closer to the ground, closer to the real world, closer to a story that could be happening in the next town over. Barrett's first big achievement is how he manages the tone of the film. It would have been easy for this story to lean into a dark, heavy-handed mood that feels suffocating from start to finish. But Barrett doesn't do that. He weaves in moments of genuine warmth, moments of fear, moments of human connection, and even moments of quiet reflection. He allows space for relationships to build, for love to emerge, for the central characters to feel like people rather than plot devices. He never lets the story sink into hopelessness, even when Jeremy is facing impossible odds. Barrett walks this fine line where the film feels gritty and dangerous, but not bleak. That balance makes the story feel alive. It's tense but never drained of emotional color. The pacing is another directorial choice that Barrett handles with precision. Instead of rushing from one shootout to the next, he paces the story like a ticking clock that's slowly winding down. The first act is carefully measured. He introduces the characters, builds the threat, and makes us sit in Jeremy's growing panic. Barrett doesn't immediately throw Jeremy into revenge mode. He lets the fear stew, lets the system fail him step by step, and slowly corners Jeremy until the transformation feels inevitable. This methodical pacing makes the eventual bursts of violence hit harder. When Jeremy finally decides to act, the tension has been stretched so tight that the release feels powerful. Barrett seems to understand that the slower build is what gives the later action its punch. He's not racing to the next explosion. He's building towards something that feels earned. Visually, Barrett makes deliberate, character-driven choices with shot composition and camera movement. When Jeremy is still just a firefighter, before his world shatters, the camera often pulls back, giving him space, showing his comfort in his surroundings. But as the threats close in, Barrett shrinks the visual space around him. The shots become tighter. The rooms feel smaller. The streets feel more dangerous. Jeremy begins to look trapped even when he's standing outside. This gradual visual suffocation is subtle but powerful. Barrett uses the camera to mirror Jeremy's emotional journey. He does something similar with Hagan. His scenes often have more breathing room, more openness, which reflects his untouchable status. Hagan feels comfortable in the world because he controls it. Jeremy feels like the walls are closing in because his life is crumbling. Barrett's use of lighting and color is also key in shaping the film's mood. Early in the story, the lighting feels natural, sometimes even warm, especially in Jeremy's firehouse or when he's with Talia. As the narrative darkens, the lighting drops into cooler, harsher tones. The warmth fades, replaced by dim rooms, flickering streetlights, and the hard glow of neon signs. Barrett carefully contrasts these visual environments. Scenes involving Hagan are often soaked in shadows or sickly greenish hues, giving them an unsettling edge. Scenes with Jeremy and Talia carry a golden softness, even when they're on the run, reminding the audience what's at stake, what's still worth fighting for. Barrett's color palette subtly communicates the emotional shifts without needing to spell them out. When it comes to action direction, Barrett doesn't aim for polished, choreographed perfection. He understands that Jeremy is not a professional killer. The fights are fast, raw, and chaotic. The camera often stays close, sometimes handheld, which throws the audience into the confusion of the moment. Jeremy is scrapping for his life. His punches are desperate, his gunshots are clumsy, his escapes are messy. Barrett refuses to give him the slick, cinematic grace that action stars usually have. This directorial choice grounds the story. The violence is ugly, sloppy, and dangerous, which makes it feel real. You don't sit back and admire the precision. You wince because it feels like someone genuinely fighting to survive. One of Barrett's most effective techniques is his attention to silence. He doesn't score every moment to tell the audience what to feel. He gives scenes room to breathe in silence. When Jeremy is sitting alone, when Mike Sella is watching helplessly, when Talia is processing what's happening around her, Barrett holds the camera, lets the silence linger, and trusts the actors to carry those moments. These pauses give emotional depth to the story. They remind the audience that the real battle isn't always the gunfights. It's the internal struggle, the fear, the guilt, the cost of violence weighing down on these characters. Barrett also makes excellent use of his cast strengths. He doesn't push Bruce Willis into dominating the film with action hero energy. Instead, he leans into Willis's quieter, more reflective side. Mike Sella becomes a tired, moral compass who knows the price of this kind of fight. Barrett lets Willis play him with restraint, and that choice gives Mike emotional weight. The same with Rosario Dawson. Barrett doesn't write her off as just the damsel in distress. He gives her agency, lets her stand up, lets her contribute to her own survival. He knows that the story's emotional core is tied to the relationship between Jeremy and Talia, and he gives their connection enough time to develop believably. Perhaps one of the most interesting things Barrett does is how he handles the villain's presence. David Hagan isn't treated like a cartoon monster who roars and blusters. Barrett places him in calm, everyday settings, restaurants, clean office spaces, quiet homes. This directorial decision makes Hagan's evil feel even more chilling. It's the normalcy that makes him terrifying. He's not lurking in dark alleys. He's sitting comfortably in the open, fully aware that his power protects him. Barrett captures this with still, patient framing that makes the viewer lean in, knowing something terrible could happen at any second. Even the location choices Barrett makes enhance the story's grounded realism. He sets key scenes in grocery stores, fire stations, hospitals, suburban streets, places that feel immediately familiar. This is not a story about elite assassins in exotic cities. This is a story about an ordinary man in a world that looks a lot like the audience's own. Barrett's direction insists on that connection. He's telling the audience that danger isn't always lurking in far-off places. It can find you in the most familiar spaces. Let's dive even deeper into the cinematography of Fire with Fire, 2012, because it's honestly more layered than it might appear on the surface. This film doesn't rely on sweeping landscapes or high-gloss visuals to pull you in. It builds its atmosphere quietly, almost stealthily, through the way it frames its characters, the choices of lighting, and the physicality of its camera work. The cinematography feels like it's working as an emotional translator, silently voicing Jeremy's escalating fear, his helplessness, and his slow shift into someone who decides to take control. What's fascinating here is that the camera almost evolves with him. And that's where the brilliance of Christopher Probst's work becomes more apparent. Starting with the color palette, the film begins with a visual warmth that mirrors the simplicity of Jeremy's life before the chaos begins. There's a sun-drenched calmness in the firehouse scenes, where everything feels soft, rounded, and approachable. You can feel the natural golden light bathing those early frames, as if the world is still somewhere safe, where heroism is saving people from fires, not dodging bullets. Jeremy's interactions with his colleagues are framed with this comforting, almost nostalgic light that makes the viewer instantly feel connected to his world. It's not flashy, but it is human. And it's critical because it builds the emotional starting point from which everything else spirals. But as soon as Jeremy witnesses the murder, the cinematography shifts, almost like the story flips a switch. The light hardens. Shadows start to creep into frames that were once open and full of daylight. There's a noticeable drop in visual warmth. And Probst begins to use tighter framing with increasing frequency. Jeremy's world literally shrinks on screen. Wide shots that once gave him breathing room are replaced with close, claustrophobic compositions. He's trapped in his car, he's trapped in his home, he's trapped in the courthouse, and the camera makes you feel every inch of that confinement. You're no longer just watching Jeremy, you're practically stuck inside the story with him, and you can't back away. The cinematography loves to play with physical barriers, doors, fences, windows, walls. Jeremy is often seen behind something, with visual obstructions subtly layered in the frame. These aren't just pretty compositional tricks, they serve a purpose. They tell us that Jeremy is being boxed in from all sides, that there are obstacles in every direction, that no path is clear anymore. Even when he's outdoors, the way the camera captures the surrounding environment often makes him look caged or cornered. Probst is constantly using physical space to tell the story of Jeremy's psychological suffocation. When it comes to the scenes involving the villain, David Hagan, the cinematography flips the tone. Hagan is typically shot in wider, more balanced frames with less visual clutter. It's subtle, but it sends a signal. Hagan has control. He's not trapped. He's not desperate. He has room to breathe. In fact, the calmness of his surroundings becomes unnerving, especially when compared to Jeremy's increasingly chaotic world. Even in moments of tension, Hagan's frames are steady, and that visual stability becomes its own kind of intimidation. Probst leans into this by never forcing the camera to chase Hagan. Instead, the camera often observes him in composed, controlled shots, emphasizing his quiet, terrifying authority. The night sequences are where the cinematography really shines. Night isn't just dark in this film, it's oppressive. The lighting design uses heavy shadows and aggressive contrast to make night scenes feel tight and dangerous. You feel like anything could emerge from the darkness at any moment. The way streetlights, neon signs, and headlights cut through the shadows creates small islands of harsh visibility in an ocean of blackness. These pockets of light are often where violence erupts, and the cinematography smartly keeps the background unfocused, leaving you with the constant sensation that something unseen is always nearby. It keeps the tension alive visually, even when there's no direct threat on screen. There's also a fantastic use of camera movement throughout the film. When Jeremy is in control, especially later in the story when he's taking matters into his own hands, the camera movements become more fluid, more deliberate. It tracks him with smoother pans, following his path with a quiet certainty. Earlier in the film, when Jeremy is confused, panicked, or on the run, the camera moves with jittery, handheld energy. There's a roughness to the movement that mirrors his state of mind. It's not the kind of chaotic, shaky cam that distracts. It's the kind that puts you inside the chase. You feel the urgency because the camera is almost tripping over itself to keep up with Jeremy's choices. Another detail that adds texture is the use of reflective surfaces. Probst often captures Jeremy through mirrors, windows, or other reflective frames, which visually reinforces the theme of duality. The man Jeremy was and the man he's becoming. These reflection shots aren't overused, but when they appear, they're deliberate. It's like the cinematography is reminding us that Jeremy is caught between two selves. the firefighter who saves lives and the hunted man who might have to take lives to survive. The cinematography also finds moments to slow down and breathe, usually during Jeremy's scenes with Talia. These moments have a softness, with lingering close-ups and warmer lighting. The camera seems to relax a little, giving Jeremy and Talia space to simply exist together. These are the few times when the world doesn't feel like it's closing in. These quieter, visually tender moments become the emotional anchors of the film, reminding the audience why Jeremy is willing to risk everything. And visually, these scenes give us a break from the tension while deepening the stakes. One of the most interesting visual choices in the film is how Probst uses environmental textures: grimy walls, cracked sidewalks, dingy gas stations, and rundown alleys. The city isn't romanticized. It feels used and indifferent, a place where violence can happen and the world will just keep spinning. The cinematography doesn't beautify this world, it captures its rough edges. And by doing that, it makes Jeremy's struggle feel more urgent, more grounded, and more believable. The action sequences deserve a special mention. Instead of staging them with wide, cinematic grandeur, the cinematography stays up close, in the chaos, breathing in the dust and gunfire. There's a raw, street-level quality to the way these scenes are shot. You can feel the cramped spaces, the limited sight lines, the sheer panic of navigating a fight you didn't plan for. The camera isn't swooping in to show you how cool the action looks. It's right there in the middle, showing you how terrifying it feels. In the final act, the cinematography reaches its most intense rhythm. The lighting becomes even more unforgiving, the framing tightens further, and the camera movements sharpen. The tension visually peaks as Jeremy finally stops running. Probst's camera starts to mirror that resolve. It's steadier, bolder, more assertive, reflecting Jeremy's mental shift. By this point, the cinematography isn't just telling the story, it's moving in lockstep with the emotional heartbeat of the film. So much of Fire's cinematography works because it's not loud, but it's always intentional. Let's take the editing and pacing of Fire, 2012, to an even more intricate level because this is where the movie's internal rhythm really defines its identity. Editing is not just about stitching scenes together. It's about building a pulse, shaping emotional beats, and guiding the audience's tension like an invisible hand. In this film, Paul Harb's editing becomes almost like an emotional metronome, meticulously controlling how fast our hearts race, when we're allowed to catch our breath, and when we're yanked right back into the storm. From the opening frames, the editing lays the groundwork with a steady, almost deceptively calm tempo. The early scenes of Jeremy's life at the firehouse have a deliberate spaciousness to them. The cuts are relaxed, the transitions are soft, and shots linger just enough to let you feel the camaraderie and simplicity of his world. These early pacing choices aren't accidental. They serve as a psychological anchor. They're creating a baseline of peace and normalcy, something the film will soon rip away. By establishing this steady rhythm, the editor gives the audience something to lose when the violence crashes into Jeremy's life. The contrast is what gives the story its punch. The first major pacing pivot happens when Jeremy witnesses the murder in the store. The editing instantly shifts gears. The calm, measured tempo snaps into sharper, more aggressive cutting. The film doesn't just pick up speed. The rhythm changes altogether. This isn't the frantic, whiplash editing you sometimes see in action films. No, this is tight, precision-cut editing designed to simulate adrenaline. The scenes contract. Transitions start to slice more quickly, but with purpose. You can feel Jeremy's panic in the way the film refuses to give you space to process what just happened. It's like the editing is racing alongside him, trying to keep up with the chaos, and dragging the audience with it whether they're ready or not. As Jeremy enters witness protection, the pacing continues to press forward, but it gets smarter here. It's not just about moving fast, it's about moving anxiously. The editor uses rapid scene changes, shorter conversational beats, and quicker fades to create a relentless sense of being pursued. Jeremy's life becomes a series of tight, controlled fragments, and the editing reflects that claustrophobia. Even when Jeremy is in quiet, supposedly safe environments, the cuts don't slow down much. The pacing maintains that subtle edge, like something bad is always just around the corner, even if it isn't immediately visible. One of the most effective editing strategies in Fire with Fire is how it balances its tension with sudden drops in pace. The film knows when to slam on the brakes. In the middle of intense chases or shootouts, Harb occasionally holds a cut longer than you expect. These moments are golden. They build a pause so thick with tension that you can almost hear the characters' heartbeats. By not rushing away from these pockets of silence, the film actually amplifies the danger. The audience is conditioned to expect fast cuts in action, but when the editor resists that instinct, it unnerves you. It's like the story is saying, "Stay here. Feel this." The editing during the action scenes is especially worth unpacking. Unlike some modern action films that rely on choppy, hyperactive cutting to simulate excitement, Fire with Fire keeps its action sharp but clear. Harb carefully balances speed with coherence. The editor respects the geography of the fight scenes. He gives you enough visual information to follow where everyone is, who's in danger, and how the action flows from one beat to the next. The rhythm of the cuts in these sequences feels like a quickened heartbeat, not a chaotic pulse. You're on edge, but you're never lost. This control allows the action to feel real and grounded instead of like a visual scramble. The pacing stays tight without sacrificing clarity. Even in the quieter character-driven moments, the editing never truly relaxes. Jeremy's scenes with Talia offer brief windows of calm, but the cuts are still disciplined. They don't linger in a way that makes you feel safe. They linger just enough to make you want to stay, but you can feel the looming weight of danger pressing on the edges of these moments. The editor knows these are the emotional glue of the story, so he gives them enough breathing room to land, but never so much that the tension fades away completely. There's also a subtle elegance to how the film transitions between storylines. The cuts between Jeremy's storyline and David Hagan's parallel movements are stitched together with a rhythm that keeps the stakes interlocked. The pacing between these two worlds feels like a dance. The film rarely spends too long away from either thread, which maintains a constant sense of looming threat. Even when Jeremy thinks he's safe, the audience has already seen Hagan making his next move. This cross-cutting pattern keeps the film's energy alive, even in scenes that might otherwise feel like exposition. When Jeremy begins his transformation from victim to aggressor, the editing shifts yet again. The rhythm of the cuts starts to settle into a more confident pace. It's a small but crucial shift. The film's tempo no longer feels like it's chasing him. It feels like he's setting the pace now. The editing starts to mirror his newfound control. Scenes are cut in a way that allows Jeremy's decisions to lead the story forward instead of reacting to others. This transition is one of the smartest pacing adjustments in the entire film. It tells you through rhythm alone that Jeremy is no longer on the defensive. One of the standout editing techniques comes in the form of sound overlap transitions. Scenes often bleed into each other using audio cues. The sound of gunfire trailing into a quiet moment, the buzz of city streets fading into a tense, intimate conversation. These transitions create a seamless flow between very different tones. The story never feels choppy or episodic. It feels like one continuous surge forward. The editor uses these sound-driven overlaps to keep the tension alive, even when the visuals are slowing down. As the film races toward its climax, the pacing accelerates just as it should, but the editing maintains a strict discipline. It doesn't devolve into a chaotic barrage of cuts. Instead, it sharpens, trims the fat even more aggressively, and propels the story toward its endgame with fierce precision. The pacing in these final sequences feels like it's racing a clock that's ticking louder with each passing second. The editor tightens the rhythm, so that even pauses feel like they're charged with electricity. There's an art to the way the editor chooses when to cut away and when to stay with a moment. In Fire with Fire, that art is on full display. There are no wasted beats. Every second is either building tension, deepening character, or escalating the stakes. The film trusts the audience to keep up but never leaves them behind. The pacing keeps the story moving like a live current. You can feel it under your skin, whether you're in the middle of a gunfight or sitting in a quiet room waiting for something terrible to happen. The overall flow of Fire with Fire is a masterclass in how to maintain narrative urgency without sacrificing emotional weight. The editing carefully balances rapid momentum with necessary pauses, ensuring the story is always engaging but never emotionally hollow. The way the film is cut, the way it breathes, the way it escalates. The soundtrack and score of Firefighter, 2012, work like an emotional compass, subtly guiding the audience through every high-stakes chase, every breathless moment of fear, and every intimate emotional exchange. Music in this film isn't just background noise. It's a quiet but constant force that shapes how we feel scene by scene, sometimes without us even realizing it. Trevor Morris, the composer behind the score, doesn't try to overwhelm the story with grand, attention-grabbing themes. Instead, he crafts a soundscape that slips under your skin, building tension in the spaces you might not be watching closely. The score knows exactly when to rise and when to hold back, creating a mood that pulses beneath the film's surface like an invisible heartbeat. Right from the beginning, the music sets the tone. The early scenes in Jeremy's life as a firefighter are accompanied by understated, almost gentle compositions. These softer tracks never call attention to themselves but create a sense of calm, security, and normalcy. This choice is essential because it lulls the audience into a false sense of comfort, making the later disruption hit even harder. The music here serves to build the emotional starting point from which Jeremy will fall. A carefully constructed quiet that will soon be shattered. When the inciting incident arrives, the brutal store murder, the score snaps into focus. The music tightens, the rhythm darkens, and Morris layers in low, tense notes that coil around the scene like a tightening rope. The score doesn't try to mimic the chaos with frantic energy. Instead, it adds weight to the danger. It creates a throbbing pressure that makes you feel the urgency without ever drowning out the visuals. The soundtrack carefully walks that line between presence and dominance. It's always there, always pressing, but it never overpowers the dialogue or the rawness of the moment. What's particularly clever about this score is its restraint. It understands that silence can sometimes scream louder than any instrument. There are key moments in the film, particularly when Jeremy is forced to make decisions that push him toward violence, where the score almost entirely disappears. In these stretches of near silence, the absence of music becomes a form of tension itself. The viewer is left sitting in the rawness of the scene, and this deliberate withholding of sound forces you to process the gravity of the moment without musical guidance. When the score does return after these silences, it often creeps back in like a shadow, low and pulsing, reminding you that the danger is never gone, only waiting. The action sequences are where the music truly starts to flex its muscles. Morris builds fast, rhythmic layers that create a driving, relentless energy without losing clarity. The percussion is sharp, the bass lines are tense but never overwhelming, and the melody often sits just beneath the surface, almost like it's racing alongside Jeremy. What's impressive is that even in these high-octane moments, the score maintains emotional integrity. It doesn't just push the action forward. It carries Jeremy's emotional state along with it. The music shifts dynamically as his fear turns into rage, and you can hear that transformation in the way the compositions evolve. The action cues aren't simply there to sound cool. They're emotionally calibrated to mirror his inner shift from hunted to hunter. There are recurring motifs in the soundtrack, but they're woven in with a subtle hand. One of the most noticeable is the recurring low string pattern that quietly underscores Jeremy's moments of anxiety and reflection. It's not a loud or immediately catchy theme, but it becomes familiar, showing up whenever Jeremy is confronted with the weight of his situation. This motif acts like a thread connecting his moments of vulnerability, reminding the audience that even as he hardens and fights back, the fear and loss never fully leave him. It's a small but powerful musical signature that deepens his character arc without ever being spoken aloud. The romantic thread between Jeremy and Talia also gets its own musical texture. Their scenes are often accompanied by warmer, more melodic cues that briefly lift the weight of the tension. The music in these moments doesn't try to force romance. It simply allows a soft glow to settle over their exchanges. These tracks aren't overly sweet or intrusive. They gently soften the hard edges of the film, giving the audience and the characters a rare moment to breathe. The careful balancing act here is crucial. The score never lets these moments feel like they belong to a different movie. Even in their tenderness, there's still an underlying caution, a hint of tension in the melody, reminding us that danger is always lurking nearby. The villain's presence in the film, David Hagan, is also marked by a distinct tonal shift in the score. Whenever Hagan takes the screen, The music often drops into more ominous, grating layers with a slow, deliberate tempo. These sound cues feel almost suffocating, like they're dragging the scene down into something darker. Hagan doesn't need a grand villain theme. His menace is felt in the grinding, tension-heavy bass that subtly surrounds him. The score doesn't glorify him. It makes his scenes feel cold, calculated, and heavy, as if the music itself is trying to make you feel the inevitability of his reach. Another brilliant use of the soundtrack is how the music adapts to the shifts in Jeremy's psychological state. As he moves from panic to anger, the score shifts with him. Early on, the music is anxious and claustrophobic, full of nervous energy. Later, as Jeremy begins to take control and embrace his role as his own protector, the music grows bolder. The percussion hits harder, the tempo steadies, and the compositions start to carry a sense of rising purpose. By the final act, the soundtrack mirrors his determination rather than his fear. The music doesn't tell you that Jeremy is suddenly invincible, but it tells you that he's no longer running. The soundtrack grows in confidence as Jeremy does, and this emotional alignment between score and character arc is one of the film's most satisfying layers. The film's ending is where the score really finds its full power. The final confrontation is driven by a relentless musical build-up that refuses to let the tension release until the very last beat. The score keeps pushing, stacking layers of sound, tightening the emotional screw as Jeremy faces off against Hagan. And when the resolution finally arrives, the music doesn't erupt into a victorious fanfare. Instead, it pulls back, softens, and lets the weight of the journey settle in. The score understands that Jeremy's story isn't a simple triumph. It's a survival that comes with a cost. The soundtrack and score of Fire with Fire are finely tuned instruments that play directly on the audience's nerves and hearts. They don't just sit in the background. They shape the experience, amplifying fear, driving momentum, and carefully threading emotion through every scene. Trevor Morris doesn't go for big, showy compositions. He builds a soundscape that slips in under the skin and stays there, guiding the story with precision, restraint, and a quiet intensity that never lets you forget what's at stake. Fire with Fire, 2012, might look on the surface like a straightforward action thriller, but buried under the gunfire, car chases, and tense shootouts are some surprisingly rich and weighty themes that give the film its emotional depth. At its heart, this is a story about survival, morality, justice, and the high cost of taking control of your own fate. The film pushes its characters, and its audience, to think about what justice really means when the system isn't enough, and whether revenge is ever truly satisfying or just another form of destruction. One of the most powerful themes running through the film is the struggle between doing what's right and doing what's necessary. Jeremy starts as an ordinary man, a firefighter, someone whose entire career is built around saving lives and protecting people. His identity is tied to the idea of preserving life, but after witnessing a brutal murder and being pulled into the witness protection program, he's forced into a situation where he must consider taking a life in order to protect his own. This internal conflict drives much of the film's tension. Jeremy's journey is not just about evading danger. It's about wrestling with the boundaries of his own morality. He knows what the law says, but the film constantly challenges him with the question: what happens when the law can't or won't protect you? This brings us to the idea of justice versus revenge. The film spends a lot of time in this gray area where legal justice seems ineffective. Hagan is a man with deep criminal connections, a figure who knows how to manipulate the system, intimidate witnesses, and walk away clean while the people he terrorizes are left in fear. Jeremy is caught in this trap where the justice system is paralyzed by red tape and technicalities. Through Jeremy's eyes, we see the slow frustration of relying on a system that can't keep up with the threat. The film doesn't spell out the answers. It leaves them messy and complicated, but it definitely explores the seductive power of revenge when justice seems impossible. It forces the audience to ask, if your life is on the line and no one can help you, would you follow the rules or would you burn the rulebook? Another theme that quietly threads through the film is the weight of responsibility. Jeremy isn't just fighting for his own survival. He's carrying the lives of those around him on his shoulders. Talia, his new love interest, Mixella, the weary cop who spent years chasing Hagan, and the people he left behind in his everyday life. Jeremy's choices ripple outward, affecting everyone he cares about. The film does a great job showing how personal responsibility can sometimes become a crushing burden. Jeremy doesn't have the luxury of thinking only about himself. Every step he takes toward confrontation puts more people at risk, and that tension hangs over him in nearly every decision. The story also plays with the idea of identity and transformation. Jeremy begins as a man who is clear about who he is, a firefighter, a helper, a protector. But as he's pushed further and further into a corner, he has to question whether he can remain that man. The witness protection program strips him of his identity, forcing him to live as someone else, hiding from the world, erasing the life he built. This loss of self is more than just a physical relocation. It's an emotional exile. Jeremy's fight isn't just about defeating Hagan. It's about reclaiming his own life, his own name, and his own place in the world. The film paints this as a painful process, not an easy hero's journey. It asks whether you can ever fully go back to who you were after crossing certain lines. There's also a running theme about how violence affects the soul. Jeremy is not a soldier, not a criminal. He's not trained for this world of guns and threats and blood. Every violent act he commits comes with a personal cost. The film doesn't glorify his transformation. It shows how each step toward becoming a killer chips away at who he used to be. This is echoed in Mike Sella's character, a cop who's been chasing Hagan for years, and who knows all too well what violence does to a person. Sella operates in this moral fatigue where doing the right thing has become a long, bitter battle. Through Sella, the film adds another layer to its thematic exploration. What happens when the fight becomes your entire life? Is it possible to walk away from that world intact? The relationship between Jeremy and Talia brings in themes of love and trust under pressure. Their connection is built under extreme circumstances, which raises interesting questions about whether love that's born in crisis can survive beyond it. Talia represents hope and a chance at a future, but their relationship is constantly under threat. The film doesn't spend too much time diving into romance for its own sake. It uses their relationship to test Jeremy's ability to hold on to his humanity. Talia becomes a symbol of what's at stake, what Jeremy is fighting to protect, and what he risks losing if he lets vengeance consume him. The backdrop of organized crime and racial tensions also lingers in the story, adding another layer to the theme of systemic failure. Hagan isn't just a random villain. He's part of a broader criminal network that has roots in corruption, intimidation, and deep societal flaws. The film lightly touches on how certain communities, like the one Talia is part of, often have to deal with cycles of violence and mistrust toward law enforcement. While Fire with Fire doesn't fully unpack these ideas in great detail, their presence adds weight to the environment in which the story takes place. It subtly reminds the audience that Jeremy's fight isn't happening in a vacuum. It's connected to larger social dynamics where power and protection aren't distributed equally. Overall, the film leaves you sitting with the uncomfortable idea that sometimes good people are forced to do terrible things. It never tries to sell Jeremy's path as heroic or clean. Instead, it shows a man who is pushed to his absolute limit, forced to make impossible choices in a world where black and white don't exist, only endless shades of gray. These themes stay with you after the credits roll, leaving you to wrestle with the same moral dilemmas that Jeremy faced. Fire with Fire may be packed with action, but at its core, it's a story about what people are willing to do to survive, protect the ones they love, and take back control in a world where control is an illusion. Fire with Fire, 2012, is not the kind of film that leans heavily on grand, showy visual effects or sweeping CGI landscapes. It's a grounded street-level action thriller that thrives more on practical intensity than on digital spectacle. But that doesn't mean the film ignores visual effects entirely. It just uses them in a more subtle, behind-the-scenes way that focuses on enhancing realism rather than creating flashy, otherworldly visuals. This is the kind of film where visual effects work best when the audience doesn't even notice them. The explosions, the gunfights, the car chases. All of these moments are designed to feel immediate and believable. The action sequences rely more on practical effects, and that's exactly what gives the film its gritty texture. The muzzle flashes, the shattered glass, the roaring flames, they feel like they're happening in real time, right in front of the camera, which adds an edge of authenticity to the chaos unfolding on screen. Take the fire scenes, for example. Jeremy is a firefighter, and the film had to deliver a convincing depiction of what it's like to battle a blazing inferno. These sequences mix practical fire effects with digital enhancements, and the result is pretty seamless. You can feel the heat, the danger, and the claustrophobia as Jeremy moves through burning buildings. The flames are not cartoonishly large or overly polished. They're messy, unpredictable, and frighteningly real. The visual effects team seems to have made a conscious effort to let the practical elements lead while using CGI to subtly enhance what's already there. Instead of drowning the screen in artificial fire, they use digital touch-ups to amplify the danger without drawing attention to the technology behind it. Gunfights are another key part of the film's action DNA. And here, the effects stay firmly rooted in practical territory. The gunfire, bullet impacts, and blood squibs all contribute to the grounded, visceral feel of the story. The effects never go overboard, they don't need to. This isn't a superhero movie or a science fiction blockbuster. It's about close-range confrontations, personal stakes, and desperate decisions. The visual style reflects that by keeping the effects sharp, tight, and focused on enhancing the tension rather than overwhelming the audience with spectacle. You won't find slow-motion bullets or elaborate digital tracking shots here. Instead, you get quick, punchy sequences where the visual effects team does their job. So while you hardly notice them at all, the occasional car chases and stunt work also benefit from practical execution. There are moments where CGI likely steps in to ensure safety or to add environmental details, like debris flying during a crash or enhancing backgrounds during fast-paced driving scenes. But these additions are woven in so tightly that they never pull you out of the moment. There's a rawness to the action that makes you feel like the characters are genuinely in harm's way. And that sensation would not land if the effects felt too glossy or artificial. One of the more understated uses of visual effects in Fire with Fire is in creating the mood of certain environments. There are nighttime scenes where lighting, color grading, and subtle digital enhancements come together to make the city streets feel alive, dangerous, and claustrophobic. Sometimes these digital tweaks are so minor that most viewers won't even register them, but they help create the atmosphere that wraps around the characters. Whether it's the soft haze of streetlights, the texture of rain-slicked asphalt, or the distant glow of a fire engine's flashing lights, the visual effects are working in the background to add layers of depth without shouting for attention. When it comes to blood effects, which can be a tricky balance in action thrillers, Fire with Fire largely sticks to practical methods. Blood squibs and physical makeup effects are used in shootout scenes to maintain that gritty, realistic tone. Occasionally, a digital blood spurt is used, especially in quick cuts or moments where practical effects would be unsafe or difficult to control. But even here, the film never leans into the exaggerated, video game-style gore that some modern action movies embrace. The goal seems to be to keep everything within the realm of believability, so when violence happens, it feels sudden, impactful, and unsettling rather than stylized or cartoonish. There are no heavy CGI characters, no large-scale destruction, no intergalactic battles. The visual effects in Fire with Fire are all about supporting the story's tension, not dominating it. It's the kind of craftsmanship that quietly holds the film together, making sure that every fire, every gunshot, every car crash, and every dangerous encounter feels grounded in the world the characters inhabit. The digital work is a supporting player, not the star of the show. In fact, the visual restraint is part of what keeps the film's pacing tight, and its tone serious. By avoiding flashy, noticeable CGI, the film stays connected to its human story. Jeremy's journey doesn't need visual effects to make it exciting. It's the raw stakes, the practical danger, and the emotional pressure that drive the narrative forward. The visual effects simply make sure that the world around him looks and feels as intense as the story demands. So while Fire with Fire won't dazzle anyone with groundbreaking digital artistry, what it does offer is a textbook example of how to use visual effects smartly and purposefully to deepen the story's impact. It's all about enhancement, never distraction. The fire burns hotter, the bullets fly faster, and the streets feel more dangerous thanks to visual effects that know exactly when to step in and when to stay hidden in the background. Fire with Fire, 2012, isn't about creating a fantastical world or building elaborate sets. It's about dropping the audience straight into a gritty, high-stakes, street-level reality where the environments feel lived in, dangerous, and authentic. The film's set design and choice of locations play a huge role in anchoring the story and shaping the emotional texture of each scene. This is the kind of movie where the locations aren't just backdrops. They actively contribute to the tension, the mood, and the psychological state of the characters. The movie moves through a variety of settings that perfectly match the story's shifting gears. From the quiet, everyday fire stations where Jeremy starts his journey, to the suffocatingly sterile safe houses of the Witness Protection Program, and finally to the dark, ominous neighborhoods controlled by David Hagan's network. The film knows how to use each location to push Jeremy further into his transformation. The contrast between these spaces tells a silent story all on its own. Jeremy's old world, full of bright, open firehouses and sunlit spaces, is a place of safety and structure. Once he enters Witness Protection, that visual comfort is ripped away, replaced by anonymous hotel rooms, unfamiliar apartments, and the cold, distant architecture of the safe houses. These new environments mirror his growing sense of isolation and his fading grip on the life he once knew. One of the most visually interesting aspects of the film is the way the urban locations are selected and framed. The streets are often dimly lit, gritty, and full of visual texture: graffiti, cracked sidewalks, flickering streetlights, chain-link fences. These details aren't accidental. They bring out the feeling that the characters are navigating a world that's rough around the edges, a world that can't be polished or cleaned up. The neighborhoods where Hagan's influence runs deep are shown as cramped, dangerous, and tense. The production design leans into this by using tight alleyways, dark basements, and cluttered interiors to create a feeling of claustrophobia. Jeremy is never given the luxury of wide-open spaces where he can feel truly free. Even when he's outside, the urban sprawl seems to close in on him, constantly reminding him that he's being hunted, and that danger is always around the next corner. When the story shifts to Jeremy's fight for survival, the film's choice of industrial sites, shadowy garages, and abandoned lots ramps up the tension. These locations are stripped down, functional, and often cold, which serves to underline the brutal nature of the confrontations that take place there. The set design doesn't try to beautify these spaces. It embraces their raw, grimy character. The walls are stained, the furniture is battered, the lighting is harsh. This attention to detail gives each location its own personality and keeps the audience immersed in the story's dangerous reality. Jeremy's love interest, Talia, brings a subtle shift in the visual language of the film. Her spaces, whether it's her home, her work environment, or the places where she and Jeremy find rare moments of peace, tend to be warmer, softer, and more personal. This contrast is important because it visually separates Jeremy's moments of vulnerability and hope from the brutal world he's trying to escape. The set design around Talia gives the audience a glimpse of what Jeremy could have if he can survive this nightmare. Her spaces are not extravagant or overly staged, but they have that touch of humanity, a few personal items, cozy lighting, a sense that real life is possible here. One of the standout locations in the film is the firehouse itself. This setting is rich with meaning. It's not just a place of work for Jeremy, it's a symbol of his identity, his brotherhood with other firefighters, and his connection to saving lives. The design of the firehouse is functional, practical, but also filled with small details that make it feel real. Gear lockers, equipment, trucks that are always ready to go. As Jeremy is forced to abandon this world, the firehouse takes on a bittersweet significance, representing everything he's lost in his fight to survive. There's also a sharp visual divide between Jeremy's world and Hagan's. Hagan's environments are often filled with symbols of power and corruption: sleek offices, hidden weapons, guarded compounds. The production design here reinforces Hagan's status as a man who controls the system from the shadows. His spaces feel cold and untouchable, which feeds the audience's sense of frustration as Jeremy struggles to bring him down. Even when Jeremy confronts him, Hagan's surroundings seem to echo his influence. Well protected, guarded by layers of people, almost like a fortress of intimidation. The Witness Protection Program's safe houses and transient apartments bring their own layer of tension to the story. These spaces are designed to be forgettable, impersonal, stripped of any identity, and that's exactly what makes them so unsettling. Jeremy is forced to live in places that have no warmth, no familiarity, and no connection to his real life. These bland, Empty rooms silently reinforce the emotional toll of being on the run, of constantly looking over your shoulder, and of losing your sense of self in the process. The set design in Fire with Fire isn't about creating eye-popping, stylized visuals. It's about building a world that feels real, dangerous, and uncomfortably close. It's the combination of thoughtful location choices, layered production design, and detailed props that make each space believable and emotionally resonant. The locations don't just house the action. They shape the characters' experiences, reflect their inner struggles, and push the story forward. Whether Jeremy is cornered in a cramped apartment, facing down his enemy in a cold warehouse, or catching his breath in a quiet room with Talia, the settings always tell their own story, one that speaks to the themes of survival, identity, and the cost of fighting for justice in a world that never makes it easy. The dialogue and script of Fire with Fire, 2012, are built with a clear goal in mind. Keep the pace sharp, the stakes personal, and the confrontations as direct and intense as possible. This is not the kind of movie that drowns in heavy monologues or poetic speeches. Instead, it's a film where words are used like weapons, quick, efficient, and often laced with threat or desperation. The script leans into its genre roots, focusing on straightforward, emotionally charged exchanges that push the plot forward and reveal character in small but meaningful ways. What makes the dialogue engaging is its grounded, street-level style. The characters don't waste time dancing around their feelings or circumstances. When Jeremy is angry, you feel it in his words. When he's afraid, his voice tightens. When he's determined, he doesn't give speeches. He makes promises that he intends to keep, even if it costs him everything. There's an authenticity in the way the characters speak that suits the film's gritty tone. You can imagine these conversations happening in real life, in real neighborhoods, among real people who don't have the luxury of overthinking every word they say. There are plenty of tense exchanges that show how well the script knows its genre. The threats in this film aren't overblown. They're cold, cutting, and to the point. David Hagan, the menacing antagonist, delivers his warnings and commands with a brutal simplicity that makes him even more terrifying. He doesn't need to shout to control a room. His lines are sharp because they carry weight, not because they're dressed up in fancy language. This makes his presence feel even more dangerous. He uses silence just as powerfully as his words, creating moments where a simple phrase can send shivers down the spine because the threat is hanging just beneath the surface. Jeremy's journey is driven by a script that balances his emotional turmoil with his growing resolve. Early in the film, his lines reflect confusion, fear, and the panic of having his life torn apart. But as he decides to take matters into his own hands, his words begin to carry more punch. He's no longer speaking like a man on the run. He's talking like a man who has accepted the fight. The dialogue tracks this transformation in subtle, believable ways. He doesn't suddenly become a slick-talking action hero. His words stay rough, raw, and human, but you can feel the shift in his tone and his choice of words as he moves closer to confronting his enemy. One of the strongest elements in the script is how it handles the quieter, more vulnerable moments. The conversations between Jeremy and Talia are carefully written to show the human cost of the violence surrounding them. These moments are where the script breathes, allowing the characters to express fear, frustration, and longing without the distraction of gunfire or threats. The way Jeremy and Talia speak to each other is simple, but emotionally loaded. They don't have flowery exchanges. They have honest ones, where every word is soaked in the weight of their situation. It's in these scenes that the dialogue carries the most emotional depth, not by being overly sentimental, but by sounding real, immediate, and heartfelt. The supporting characters also get their moments to shine through the script. Mike Sella, played by Bruce Willis, is a detective who operates with sharp instincts and no patience for nonsense. His dialogue is a mix of tough guy pragmatism and understated empathy. Willis's delivery of these lines gives the character a sense of authority without making him the typical hard-edged, emotionless cop. The script gives him lines that cut straight to the point, but also offers him brief flashes of moral weight when he questions the system he works within. His words are delivered with a quiet power that leaves an impact without taking the spotlight away from Jeremy's story. The script also knows how to use silence effectively. There are moments where characters stare each other down, where the threat is communicated without a single word. These pauses, these unfinished sentences, these long looks. All of them are written into the fabric of the script, giving the audience space to feel the tension building. The dialogue never overstays its welcome because the filmmakers understand that sometimes what isn't said can hit harder than what is. When it comes to standout lines, the film doesn't chase quotable one-liners in the way some action thrillers do, but it does have moments where the words carry a weight that lingers. Lines where Jeremy promises to protect Talia no matter the cost, where Hagan coldly dismisses human life as disposable, where Mike Sella quietly admits how broken the system is. These moments hit because they come from a place of personal truth within the characters. There's also a steady undercurrent in the dialogue that touches on themes of justice, revenge, and what it means to protect the people you love when the system fails you. The script carefully threads these ideas into conversations, never forcing them but allowing them to emerge naturally as the characters struggle with their choices. Whether it's Jeremy deciding to break the rules to save his own life, or Mike quietly helping from the sidelines, or Hagan ruthlessly tightening his grip on his territory, the words spoken by these characters reveal their codes of ethics, their weaknesses, and their desperation. Fire with Fire doesn't aim for the grand theatrical style of writing. It finds power in the raw, conversational, sometimes brutally simple way its characters speak. The dialogue serves the story without drawing attention to itself, but when it needs to land an emotional punch or create sharp tension, it knows exactly how to do it. The script moves with purpose, balancing moments of action, threat, and vulnerability, making sure that every conversation adds something to the escalating stakes. It's not about perfect lines, it's about believable ones, and in a film like this, that's exactly what keeps the story grounded and gripping. Fire with Fire, 2012, confidently dives into the action thriller genre, embracing many of the conventions that fans of this type of film expect while sprinkling in moments that aim to push the boundaries just enough to keep things fresh. It's a film that doesn't try to pretend it's reinventing the wheel, but instead focuses on delivering what the genre promises. High-stakes, dangerous confrontations, moral dilemmas, and adrenaline-pumping action sequences. From the very beginning, the film throws us into the heart of the story with a violent, life-altering encounter that sets the tone for the rest of the ride. The use of a protagonist forced into a witness protection program is a familiar setup in action thrillers, but Fire with Fire adds its own edge by shifting the narrative into a revenge-driven manhunt that blurs the line between right and wrong. The movie leans into genre expectations with a vigilante storyline that fans can immediately get behind. Jeremy, an ordinary firefighter, is pushed to his limits and forced to make impossible choices when the system that's supposed to protect him fails. This is a classic underdog hero formula, where the audience is invited to root for a man who steps far outside his comfort zone to fight for his own survival and protect the people he cares about. The film doesn't shy away from the brutality of this choice, nor does it dress Jeremy up as a flawless action hero. Instead, it balances the expected gunfights, chase scenes, and gritty confrontations with moments of emotional vulnerability that are sometimes rare in this kind of fast-paced thriller. What's interesting is that the film plays with genre expectations by giving the main character a profession that's typically associated with saving lives, not taking them. Jeremy's firefighter background creates a subtle contrast throughout the story. He's someone whose life revolves around rescue and protection, yet he's forced into situations where he must confront the possibility of killing to survive. This inner conflict isn't always front and center in the dialogue, but it hums beneath the surface, giving the story an added layer. The film balances this well with the action beats, never letting it get too philosophical, but making sure it's always part of Jeremy's internal struggle. The villain, David Hagan, is built straight from the action thriller mold. A ruthless white supremacist crime boss who operates with terrifying precision and a calm menace. On paper, this could easily fall into cliché territory, but the film injects enough cold realism into his character that he becomes genuinely unsettling. He isn't an over-the-top scenery-chewing villain. He's methodical, calculating, and quietly dangerous, which fits perfectly within the gritty tone the film is aiming for. His presence anchors the story firmly within its genre, while adding a real-world edge that makes the stakes feel even higher. When it comes to action, the film doesn't try to overload the audience with extravagant stunts or massive set pieces. Instead, it keeps the action raw, personal, and close quarters. Gunfights are intense but never overly stylized, and the violence, while prominent, serves the story rather than overwhelming it. This choice grounds the film and gives it a weight that fits the revenge-driven tone. It's not about spectacle, it's about survival, desperation, and finishing what was started. This makes the action scenes feel urgent and emotionally connected to the characters, which is a detail that some action thrillers overlook in favor of bigger explosions. The suspense is well crafted, particularly in the way Jeremy is forced to navigate dangerous spaces, while knowing that Hagan's reach is almost limitless. There are moments where the tension quietly builds, especially when Jeremy is hiding in plain sight, trying to protect Talia while avoiding the men hunting him. The film uses these beats to create a steady rhythm of danger and relief, pushing the audience to stay on edge without burning out on nonstop action. The film also dips its toe into romantic drama with Jeremy's relationship with Talia, a subplot that could have felt forced but instead brings a surprising amount of heart to the story. In many action thrillers, the romantic angle is often reduced to a throwaway plot device, but here it actually serves as Jeremy's core motivation. His desire to protect Talia and build a future with her is what pushes him to cross moral boundaries. The relationship scenes give the audience a breather from the violence while also reinforcing what's at stake, which helps the emotional weight of the story land more effectively. What's also notable is how the film introduces humor in a restrained way. There's no attempt to force wisecracks into tense moments, and the humor that does surface is grounded and usually tied to character interactions, particularly with Mike Sella. Bruce Willis brings a dry, understated sarcasm that fits well within the film's serious tone without breaking the tension. The humor is used like a pressure valve. It briefly releases tension without undermining the gravity of the story, which is a smart choice for a film that wants to stay focused on its darker themes. Thematically, the film sticks to familiar action thriller territory. Justice versus revenge, the failure of the legal system, the burden of taking the law into your own hands, and the lengths someone will go to protect the people they love. These aren't groundbreaking ideas, but the film commits to exploring them with sincerity. It doesn't try to preach or present complex moral lectures. It lets the characters embody these themes through their choices, mistakes, and victories. In terms of pacing, the film adheres to the genre's rhythm, offering bursts of action separated by quieter character-driven moments. It respects the audience's expectation for consistent momentum, while making sure that each beat carries weight. There's no unnecessary meandering. The story is always moving toward confrontation, always escalating the stakes. Fire with Fire is a film that knows its genre and respects its audience. It plays within the lines of the action thriller template, but adds enough personal stakes, emotional depth, and character-driven choices to make it feel more immediate and less disposable than many of its counterparts. It's not trying to reinvent the action film, but it makes sure to execute the genre's core elements with focus, grit, and a touch of heart, giving fans exactly what they came for while adding just enough freshness to keep them hooked. Fire with Fire, 2012, might seem at first glance like a straight-up action thriller focused on revenge, but if you dig a little deeper, you'll find that the film actually brushes up against some pretty weighty social and cultural issues. It's not a film that loudly preaches or sets out to change minds, but it does tap into real-world concerns in a way that's hard to ignore. One of the most noticeable threads is the depiction of systemic failure, particularly when it comes to law enforcement and the protection of innocent people. Jeremy's entire nightmare begins because the criminal justice system, which is supposed to shield him after he agrees to testify, is woefully inadequate in doing so. The film subtly asks what happens when the system that's designed to keep people safe is either too slow, too bureaucratic, or too powerless to stand up to well-connected criminals. Jeremy's decision to go outside the law isn't portrayed as some grand rebellion. It's a desperate response to the system's inability to protect him. This taps into a real-world frustration that many people feel when they see justice delayed, denied, or ignored. And while the film doesn't dwell on these ideas in a philosophical way, they linger in the background. The story also dives headfirst into the ugliness of racism and white supremacy, with the villain David Hagan leading a brutal, organized group that uses fear, intimidation, and violence to maintain control. This isn't some faceless crime syndicate. The film directly confronts the terrifying reality of hate groups operating within modern society. Hagan's gang isn't just a collection of generic thugs. They represent something deeply rooted in historical and cultural hatred. The film doesn't spend a lot of time unpacking the ideology behind Hagan's organization, but it certainly doesn't sanitize it either. It shows how these groups thrive in the shadows, how they manipulate systems, and how they present a persistent threat that can't always be easily dismantled by traditional law enforcement. By placing a white supremacist at the center of the story, the film touches on how these ideologies continue to fester in society and the long-lasting harm they cause to communities. Another interesting layer comes through the film's treatment of power dynamics and corruption. Hagan's influence extends far beyond his immediate gang. He's connected, protected, and feared, which makes him incredibly difficult to bring down. The film paints a grim but recognizable picture of how certain individuals seem untouchable because of their wealth, their networks, or their ability to manipulate the system to their advantage. This mirrors real-world stories of powerful criminals or corrupt figures who seem to slip through the cracks time and time again. The frustration that builds from this is not only felt by the characters in the film but also by the audience, who can probably think of plenty of similar examples outside of cinema. On a more personal level, the film gently explores trauma and the psychological aftermath of violence. Jeremy doesn't become a hardened killer overnight. He's a firefighter, a man whose life has always been about saving people, about selflessness and community service. When he's thrown into a life of hiding, fear, and retaliation, there's an emotional toll that can't be ignored. The film doesn't overplay this aspect, but there are moments where Jeremy's exhaustion, his fear, and his desperation shine through, showing how violence leaves scars that go far beyond the physical. It's a subtle commentary on how ordinary people, when cornered, can be forced into impossible choices that forever change who they are. The relationship between Jeremy and Talia also weaves into the film's cultural lens, particularly in how love and emotional connection become anchors during times of extreme crisis. In a world where survival seems to demand moral compromises and brutal decisions, their relationship is a small but vital rebellion against the overwhelming darkness surrounding them. It's not just about revenge, it's also about finding something worth living for in the middle of the chaos. The film's depiction of the police, especially through Bruce Willis's character Mike Sella, also says something about the human side of law enforcement. Sella isn't a perfect cop. He's driven by his own regrets and personal vendettas, and he understands the limitations of the badge he wears. He's stuck operating within a system that is technically correct but morally frustrating. Through him, the film quietly acknowledges the limitations that even the good cops face when bureaucracy and red tape get in the way of real justice. His support of Jeremy's off-the-books mission isn't officially sanctioned, but it speaks volumes about how people inside the system sometimes realize the only way to fight certain evils is to bend the rules. Fire with Fire doesn't hammer these social commentaries into the audience. It lets them simmer beneath the surface of the revenge plot. The social issues are baked into the characters, the villain's motivations, and the very structure of the story. The film trusts the audience to pick up on these threads without pausing to spell them out. Whether it's the failure of the justice system, the persistent threat of racism and hate groups, the corrupting influence of power, or the emotional fallout of violence, the film touches on these topics in a way that adds depth to the straightforward action. It's not a lecture. It's a reflection of the messy, imperfect world that Jeremy is fighting through. Fire with Fire, 2012, is one of those films that doesn't just play out in front of the audience. It pulls them in and keeps them locked in with a mix of adrenaline, emotional stakes, and genuine tension. From the very beginning, the film taps into something primal: the fear of being powerless, the terror of being hunted, and the desperate urge to protect the ones you love. These are emotions that hit hard and fast, and the movie knows how to work them to its advantage. The opening scene sets the tone perfectly. It's not just a random act of violence. It's a life-altering moment that immediately makes the audience side with Jeremy. That emotional hook is what makes the rest of the film so gripping. You're not just watching to see what happens. You're watching because you care about whether Jeremy survives, whether he finds peace, whether the monster chasing him gets what's coming. The film knows when to pump up the intensity and when to pull back for moments of emotional breathing room. 1 minute, the audience is holding its breath during a tense standoff, and the next, it's caught up in the quieter, more intimate scenes between Jeremy and Talia. These quieter scenes aren't just filler. They give the audience a chance to catch their breath while also deepening the emotional investment. The chemistry between Jeremy and Talia isn't forced. It feels like a natural, necessary connection between two people clinging to something good in a life that's rapidly spinning out of control. That connection isn't just there to check a box. It genuinely makes the audience root for their survival, not just as individuals, but as a couple trying to build something despite all odds. There are moments scattered throughout the film that land with a real punch. Whether it's a brutal action sequence, a sudden betrayal, or an unexpected moment of vulnerability, the film keeps finding ways to jolt the audience's emotions. Some scenes are crafted to provoke anger, especially when the villain Hagan flaunts his power and untouchability. There's a raw frustration that builds up, and the film smartly plays on that emotion, making the audience eager to see justice delivered. Other moments, particularly Jeremy's near breakdowns and his moments of desperation, strike a more somber chord. The film doesn't shy away from showing what this ordeal is doing to him mentally and emotionally, which pulls the audience even closer to his journey. The action is another big driver of audience engagement. It's not just there for spectacle, it's tied to the characters' survival and their emotional stakes. Each shootout, each chase, each confrontation feels like it matters, and that keeps the audience on edge. The pacing makes sure that things never feel like they're dragging. Just when you think Jeremy might be safe, the story throws another curveball, keeping the tension high and the audience leaning forward. These constant shifts between safety and danger keep the audience actively engaged, because there's always that lingering question of what's going to happen next. The film also has those classic action thriller moments that audiences love to talk about. The intense face-offs, the moments where the hero takes control, the unexpected help from allies. It all feeds into the kind of experience that sparks post-movie conversations. People can debate whether Jeremy made the right choices, whether Sella's off-the-books support was justified, or whether the ending really delivered the satisfaction they were waiting for. The film invites that kind of discussion because it plays with moral gray areas. It doesn't offer clean, easy answers, and that's exactly what keeps people thinking about it after the credits roll. Even though Fire with Fire is primarily a thriller, it sneaks in enough emotional substance to encourage repeat viewings. The layers of Jeremy's journey, the complexity of the villain, the subtle cracks in the justice system. It's the kind of film that gives audiences something new to notice each time they watch. Whether it's catching the nuance in a tense conversation, appreciating the build-up to a critical decision, or seeing how Jeremy's body language changes as he's slowly consumed by his mission, there's more going on than just bullets and bravado. There are also those small but memorable details that tend to stick with the audience long after the film is over. The way Hagan's threats linger like a shadow, the weight behind Bruce Willis's quiet, no-nonsense delivery, the specific moments where Jeremy hesitates and you can almost feel him weighing the moral cost of what he's about to do. These are the kinds of beats that elevate audience engagement from simple entertainment to genuine investment. The film may not have the flashiest explosions or the most complex plot twists, but what it does have is a consistent, steady grip on the audience's emotions. It keeps you wired in from start to finish, and even when the story ends, it leaves you thinking about what you've just seen and what it all really meant. When you stack Fire with Fire, 2012, against other films in the action thriller and crime drama space, it's interesting to see where it lands. It doesn't try to completely reinvent the genre, but it does manage to mix familiar elements in a way that feels sharp and focused. This movie lives in the same neighborhood as titles like Safe House, Man on Fire, Law-Abiding Citizen, and A History of Violence. All of these films revolve around the themes of justice, revenge, and the heavy price that comes with taking the law into your own hands. What makes Fire with Fire stand out a little is its balance between personal stakes and procedural elements. It's not a sprawling international conspiracy like Safe House, nor is it as brutal and meditative as A History of Violence. Instead, it's more grounded. It keeps its attention tightly fixed on one man's fight for his life and the cost of being a witness to evil. When compared to Bruce Willis's other films in the same era, especially his many mid-2000s action thrillers, Fire with Fire lands somewhere in the middle. It doesn't have the blockbuster muscle of the Die Hard series or the stylish insanity of Red, but it does present Willis in a much quieter, mentor-style role that plays well to his natural stoicism. He's not front and center here, which sets this apart from many of his other films where he's usually the one leading the charge. In fact, one of the things this film does differently is let the main emotional weight rest squarely on Josh Duhamel's shoulders. Unlike the usual formula where the big-name star drives every scene, Fire with Fire gives the spotlight to a lead who's more of an everyman, someone who's not a seasoned fighter or a natural hero, but just a guy who got caught in the worst possible situation. That shift in focus creates a slightly fresher dynamic. If you compare Fire with Fire to revenge-driven films like Man on Fire, there's a noticeable difference in scale and emotional intensity. Man on Fire is relentless, it's operatic in the way it dives into grief and rage, while Fire with Fire feels more like a fast, gritty sprint rather than a slow burn. The pacing is tighter and the story moves quickly from one crisis to the next, more in line with the structure of something like Parker or Safe, films that deliver straight-to-the-point action with enough emotional stakes to keep you invested. Fire with Fire doesn't sink into heavy-handed moral debates or long, reflective sequences. Instead, it focuses on survival, urgency, and the rush to stay one step ahead of the villain. When looking at the criminal underworld aspect of the film, Fire with Fire brings in the racial tension angle, focusing on neo-Nazi crime syndicates. This isn't completely new in the genre, but it's less commonly the main antagonist group in action thrillers of this style. Films like American History X or Imperium have tackled this subject matter more directly and more intensely, but in Fire with Fire, it's a driving force without overwhelming the personal story. It doesn't get too deep into the ideology of the villains. It's more about the immediate threat and the systemic corruption that allows them to thrive. In this way, the film borrows pieces from gritty crime dramas, but keeps its feet firmly planted in the action thriller format, where the focus is on momentum and personal vengeance rather than social dissection. In terms of the action beats and visual style, Fire with Fire doesn't try to stand out with overly stylized fight choreography or complex set pieces. It's not reaching for the hyper-precision of a John Wick film, nor is it trying to deliver the complex emotional webs of a Prisoners or The Equalizer. It sticks to a more straightforward playbook, much like many of the direct-to-video action films from that time. But what gives it a bit of an edge is the way it uses its supporting cast. Rosario Dawson brings heart and vulnerability to what could have been a standard love interest role, and Vincent D'Onofrio gives the film its teeth. His portrayal of Hagan is a familiar type of villain, the untouchable, unapologetically evil man, but D'Onofrio's screen presence makes him feel a little more dangerous, a little more unpredictable than the usual crime boss. Compared to other action thrillers where the hero is a cop, a soldier, or an assassin with years of training, Fire with Fire stands apart by placing a firefighter at the center of the story. That's a profession not often used as the backbone of a revenge film, and it adds an interesting layer. Jeremy's not someone who's built for violence, but someone who is suddenly forced to navigate it. This simple twist on the hero archetype gives the movie a bit of freshness, even though much of its structure follows the well-worn genre tracks. Overall, Fire with Fire is like a solid mid-tier entry in the action thriller space. It doesn't flip the genre upside down, but it knows exactly what kind of movie it wants to be. When compared to similar films, it holds its own by focusing on tension, speed, and grounded performances rather than trying to break new cinematic ground. It borrows familiar ingredients, stirs in a few unique character angles, and delivers the kind of punchy, edge-of-your-seat experience that genre fans can enjoy without needing it to be groundbreaking. It stands as a good companion to films with similar themes, but it carves out just enough of its own identity through its lead's profession, its fast pace, and its no-nonsense attitude. Fire with Fire, 2012, isn't the type of film that loudly advertises its symbolism, but if you look closely, there are several layered cues and visual metaphors quietly woven into the story that add depth to its straightforward action narrative. The most obvious symbolic thread is right there in the title, Fire itself. Fire isn't just Jeremy's profession. It's a metaphor for the uncontrollable danger that consumes everything in its path, and more importantly, it's a perfect representation of Jeremy's personal journey. At the beginning of the film, Jeremy is a firefighter, a man whose entire life is built around controlling, containing, and extinguishing fire. He's trained to keep danger at bay, to protect life, to stay calm in chaos. But the moment he becomes a target, the roles flip. He's no longer the one holding the hose. He's the one running from the flames, from the kind of fire that can't be put out with water. As the story unfolds, Jeremy is slowly forced to become the very thing he's spent his life fighting. The phrase "fighting fire with fire" becomes a thematic backbone. It's not just a catchy title, it's a direct commentary on how Jeremy must embrace violence and aggression to survive and fight back. There's also the visual motif of heat and cold that subtly plays throughout the film. Early scenes connected to Jeremy's everyday life, at the firehouse with his friends, with Talia, are often bathed in warm lighting, creating a sense of safety and community. As soon as Hagan enters the picture, the color palette starts shifting. The settings tied to danger, Hagan's operations, or Jeremy's isolation often appear colder, harsher, with grays and blues taking over the frame. This transition from warmth to coldness parallels Jeremy's emotional shift as he moves from a place of comfort to a space of moral ambiguity and personal war. By the time Jeremy begins his revenge mission, the warmth that used to surround him is almost completely gone, replaced by sterile, brutal environments that reflect his emotional detachment and focus on survival. The fire also acts as a metaphor for purification and destruction. In firefighting terms, controlled burns are sometimes necessary to prevent larger disasters, and that idea bleeds into Jeremy's arc. He essentially chooses to burn parts of his old life, his innocence, his moral boundaries, to protect what truly matters. His journey is about purging the evil that threatens to consume him and the people he loves, even if it means scorching everything in his path. There's a quiet tragedy in this, because Jeremy's battle scars aren't just physical. They're emotional burns that will never fully heal. The fire might save him, but it changes him forever. The villain, David Hagan, also has a symbolic layer. His role as the head of a white supremacist crime syndicate positions him as a living embodiment of uncontrollable, hateful fire, dangerous, destructive, and insidious. His ability to operate within the cracks of the legal system symbolizes a fire that spreads underground, hidden, smoldering just beneath the surface until it erupts. The way the law fails to contain him parallels the idea of a wildfire that escapes the control lines, forcing Jeremy to become the backfire that cuts off the flames. The recurring use of enclosed spaces is another visual metaphor that quietly echoes Jeremy's entrapment. Whether it's hiding in safe houses, being cornered in narrow hallways, or navigating the tight confines of a burning building, the film often places him in environments where escape seems impossible. These spatial restrictions mirror the tightening noose around his life, his freedom, and his choices. Each time he finds a way out, it's not just a physical escape, it's a symbolic refusal to let his enemies control his narrative. The relationship between Jeremy and Talia also carries a symbolic weight. She represents the flickering flame of hope, the life Jeremy could still have if he can just survive the storm. When she's attacked, it's as if his final safe haven is set on fire, leaving him with no choice but to fully embrace the fight. Her survival becomes Jeremy's last tether to humanity, and the life he's desperate to reclaim. The film never explicitly states this, but their bond operates as the moral compass guiding Jeremy through his darkest choices. Even smaller details like the repeated emphasis on fire trucks, protective gear, and the firehouse act as symbols of Jeremy's former identity. As he drifts further into vigilante territory, those symbols fade from the story, visually reinforcing that he's stepping away from the man he was and becoming someone else entirely. Fire with Fire may not position itself as an overtly symbolic film, but when you dig beneath the surface, the visual language and thematic threads reveal a surprisingly thoughtful layer of metaphor that ties fire, survival, morality, and identity into one cohesive emotional journey. It's a film that tells the story of a man who used to control fire, but ultimately realizes that sometimes the only way to fight certain flames is to become one yourself. Fire with Fire, 2012, isn't part of a franchise and doesn't tie into any larger cinematic universe, which actually makes it stand out in a time when so many action films are connected to sequels, reboots, or extended storylines. It exists as a self-contained story with its own set of stakes, characters, and outcomes, which gives it a kind of raw, standalone intensity. There's no expectation of a follow-up, no dangling threads for a sequel, and no grander world-building that hints at future installments. This approach allows the film to focus all its energy on the immediate story. Jeremy's personal journey, his fight for survival, and his battle against a criminal empire that feels real and immediate, rather than part of a sprawling, interconnected saga. Because it doesn't belong to a franchise, the film carries a bit of an old-school vibe. A throwback to the early 2000s action thrillers that weren't built for sequels, but for single, punchy narratives that hit hard and fast. In that sense, Fire with Fire shares DNA with films like Man on Fire, Out of Time, or Safe, where the story arc is tight, personal, and fully resolved within one movie. It's not aiming to launch a series or set up spin-offs. It's designed to give the audience one intense ride, and then close the book, which actually makes its pacing and structure feel refreshing compared to the serialized storytelling so common today. Even though Fire with Fire isn't historically based, it does tap into real-world anxieties and cultural fears in a way that adds weight to its fictional story. The depiction of neo-Nazi crime syndicates is not just a random villain choice. It reflects a very real and persistent threat in modern society. The film doesn't deep dive into the historical lineage of these hate groups, but it uses their existence as a believable and unsettling backdrop. It positions these criminals as part of a system that is both terrifyingly organized and disturbingly entrenched in parts of society, where corruption allows them to thrive. This choice grounds the film in a harsh, plausible reality. The white supremacist angle isn't exaggerated into cartoon villainy. It's presented in a way that feels like it could very well exist just out of sight, making the stakes more immediate and the danger more relatable. While it doesn't try to be a historical exposé or a deeply researched social commentary, the movie does skim the surface of these tensions and uses them effectively to create unease. It leverages the audience's real-world understanding of these groups to quickly establish the kind of threat Jeremy is up against. The justice system's inability to protect him feels credible, because it mirrors countless stories where bureaucracy and legal limitations leave innocent people vulnerable. This narrative choice connects the film to real-life frustrations about witness protection, systemic loopholes, and the complex, sometimes ineffective structures of law enforcement. Since Fire with Fire isn't tied to a specific historical event or time period, it doesn't anchor itself in a particular decade or cultural moment. Instead, it feels almost timeless in its depiction of crime, corruption, and vigilante justice. It could be happening in any modern city, at any time, which gives it a broad, flexible appeal. There are no attempts to lock it into a specific historical context with era-defining costumes, music, or political events. It simply exists in the contemporary world of crime dramas, where personal justice clashes with institutional failure. If you stack it next to films that are part of larger franchises, like Taken, The Equalizer, or John Wick, Fire with Fire feels more stripped down. There's no mythos surrounding Jeremy. He's not part of an elite network of assassins or a retired special agent with a secret past. He's just a regular guy forced to make extraordinary decisions. This clear, no-frills approach gives the film a different texture. It doesn't try to build a legacy. It doesn't chase after world building. It commits to its own lane. One man, one story, one fight. So while Fire with Fire doesn't expand any franchise or lock itself into a specific historical framework, its value lies in its simplicity and its ability to feel relevant without becoming overly political or preachy. It's a standalone thriller that brushes up against real-world dangers and taps into universal themes of fear, revenge, and the fight to reclaim control. The absence of franchise ties or historical anchors actually works in its favor, making it feel urgent, direct, and self-contained. A complete story that burns fast, hits hard, and leaves its mark without needing a sequel to finish the job. Fire with Fire, 2012, isn't the kind of film that was built to dominate the box office or break records. And you can feel that in the way it was both budgeted and marketed. It's a mid-level action thriller with a production budget that likely hovered around $20 million. A modest figure compared to the blockbuster heavyweights of the same era. This budget bracket placed it comfortably in the straight-to-DVD and limited theatrical release territory, which was a popular lane for many action films at the time, especially those driven by big names in supporting roles rather than expensive world-building or cutting-edge special effects. The production value of Fire with Fire is solid for its budget. It doesn't try to overreach. You're not going to see sprawling CGI landscapes, jaw-dropping set pieces, or massive crowd scenes. Instead, the money is wisely spent on a few tightly constructed action sequences, well-selected locations that bring grit and realism to the film, and of course, securing an impressive cast headlined by Josh Duhamel, Bruce Willis, and Rosario Dawson. Having Bruce Willis on the roster in particular was a huge marketing asset, even though his screen time is relatively limited. His presence was clearly a strategy to give the film extra star power and market appeal, especially in international markets where his name still carried significant weight at the time. Financially, Fire with Fire didn't storm the box office. It actually saw a limited release in theaters and made most of its money through home video sales, on-demand rentals, and streaming platforms. This was during a period where many mid-tier action films found their primary audiences not in cinema halls, but on living room screens, especially in international territories where the demand for English-language action thrillers was consistently high. The film's performance was more of a slow burn rather than a box office explosion, quietly collecting revenue over time rather than racking up massive opening weekend numbers. The marketing for Fire with Fire wasn't aggressively rolled out in the way blockbuster films are. It didn't have giant ad campaigns plastered across billboards or endless TV spots. Instead, it relied heavily on digital promotion, trailers pushed through online platforms, DVD cover art that leaned into Bruce Willis's tough guy image, and word of mouth within the action fan community. The movie's appeal was more about accessibility than spectacle, something you might stumble across on a streaming service or pick up at a video store as a Saturday night thrill ride. The audience reception played an interesting role here. Critics were largely dismissive, calling it predictable and formulaic, but action fans didn't necessarily care. For viewers looking for a straightforward, no-frills revenge thriller, Fire with Fire delivered what was expected. It didn't try to be groundbreaking, it just aimed to entertain. This dynamic meant that while it didn't break into mainstream consciousness in a big way, it quietly built a niche following among fans who enjoy these kinds of punchy, lower-budget action films that aren't tied to larger cinematic universes. The financial outcome of Fire with Fire might not have made headlines, but it also wasn't a catastrophic loss. Its budget was low enough that the combined revenue from limited theatrical release, international sales, home video, and later streaming availability probably covered the investment, and then some. These kinds of films typically find their financial legs long after their initial release through licensing deals, TV rights, and consistent rentals. In the big picture, Fire with Fire sits in that interesting space where it's not a financial juggernaut, but also not a total flop. It represents a class of movies that aim for steady, reliable returns rather than splashy box office glory. The modest budget matched its production quality perfectly, and while it didn't bring in blockbuster-level profits, it carved out a respectable spot for itself in the world of action thrillers that are discovered over time rather than dominating headlines on opening weekend. Fire with Fire, 2012, isn't the kind of film you're likely to find making a grand return to theaters or popping up in special cinema events. This is a film that really found its life beyond the big screen, and today it comfortably lives in the world of digital rentals, streaming services, and on-demand platforms. If you're looking to experience this gritty action thriller, the best place to start is on popular streaming platforms where it's often part of their rotating catalog of mid-tier action films. It's the kind of movie that shows up as a recommended watch when you've been binging crime dramas, revenge thrillers, or Bruce Willis action movies. You're not going to need to track down a collector's edition Blu-ray or search specialty stores to find this one. It's widely available for digital rental and purchase across most online marketplaces, so you can easily queue it up for a weekend movie night without any hassle. The beauty of a film like Fire with Fire is that it doesn't require a cinema's booming surround sound or a massive IMAX screen to deliver its punch. This is a story that works just as well when you're watching at home, maybe with the lights dimmed, snacks within arm's reach, and no distractions. It's a perfect choice for a late-night watch when you're in the mood for fast-paced, character-driven action. For those who still love the old-school experience of DVDs and physical media, Fire with Fire is also available in those formats and often shows up in bargain bins, multi-film action bundles, or on the shelves of second-hand stores. It's one of those accessible titles that doesn't hide behind exclusivity or limited release windows. Whether you're streaming it on your smart TV, renting it online, or picking up a physical copy, you'll find that the movie is ready to watch without any barriers. If you really want to get the most out of it, the best way to watch Fire with Fire is in one uninterrupted sitting where you can fully dive into the tension, the revenge-driven narrative, and the sharp bursts of action without pausing or skipping around. The pacing of the film is built to keep you engaged steadily, and watching it straight through helps preserve the sense of urgency and emotional stakes that drive Jeremy's journey. Watching it on a decent-sized screen with solid sound, whether it's your TV or a good tablet with headphones, will let you feel the intensity of the firefights, the pulse of the soundtrack, and the gritty atmosphere of the criminal underworld that the movie throws you into. The film doesn't depend on theatrical spectacle to deliver its impact. It's intimate enough to make home viewing the ideal format. It fits perfectly into that category of action thrillers you can stumble across on a quiet night, settle in with, and get pulled into a story that doesn't waste your time, but keeps you entertained with its mix of personal stakes, crime world tension, and shootouts that pack just enough punch to keep your adrenaline up. Whether you catch it on a subscription service, rent it for a few hours, or dust off a DVD copy, Fire with Fire is a film that's ready to be discovered wherever you are.